Hello and welcome to another Python tutorial. So in this tutorial, it's going to be a multi-part series because we are going to cover web scraping with BeautifulSoup. So BeautifulSoup is a Python library that basically was designed to make the web scraping process a lot easier than it had to be. And so this is a very popular library among data scientists or just people who collect data in general, just because it is so simple to use. But a lot of times I notice that when people use BeautifulSoup, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes they're not actually aware of. So they kind of see the more basic examples, but they don't really go into the kind of the nitty gritty stuff, or the sense of like understanding what the next element attribute is compared to the siblings attribute or something along those lines. And so in this tutorial, we're going to cover kind of more the detail aspect about it. So the goal is to obviously we're going to scrape one particular website. And then we're also going to use some simple examples to kind of reinforce the concepts and the ideas behind it. So the goal is to take the information that we see on this Wikipedia page. I'm a big history nerd, and I thought World War II was a very interesting time in history, so I've done a lot of research on it. And so I thought it'd be kind of an interesting topic to scrape. And basically, any web page that you see in front of you, for those of you who don't really understand kind of how web pages work, all that we're seeing in front of us is HTML code and CSS along with some JavaScript. And so HTML basically allows us to create the containers in a sense that you see on your web page. So the HTML provides the structure. The CSS, that kind of defines the style of your particular web page. So the coloring, the fonts, the spacing, all that kind of stuff. And then JavaScript is more about the interactivity about it, so making it more dynamic, something where if I hover over something, it goes underline, or something like the windows will pop out and things like that. So that's more of the JavaScript. And if you ever want to see the code behind a web page, it's really simple. So if you're on a Chrome browser, all you do is you right click, and then you can do two options. One is view page source, which will open up a new tab, and it will basically show you all of the HTML code along with the CSS and JavaScript that belongs to this particular web page. And so as you can tell right off the bat, there's a ton of code. There's a lot of code that you would have to sift through. But if you start looking through it, you'll actually notice that all the information that you're seeing on this page is simply embedded somewhere in the code, basically. And so there's structure to this. The structure is basically you look for certain tags because those are different containers or objects inside your particular web page. And then you can go, in some cases, deeper within those particular tags to find the information you want. And so there's a lot of different tags up there. Each one of those tags kind of have different meanings. For example, if you want to look for links in your particular web page, you would go to your A tags and then find your href attribute. So that's kind of a little bit of at least an understanding of kind of the structure that we're seeing. Now, if you also wanted to interact with this page real time, you can also right click, and if you go to inspect, you'll also see again all the code. But if you go right up here where you choose select an element, anything you hover over will now take you directly to that code in the HTML code. And so you can actually expand it out, and as long as you hover over it, it will tell you all the information that's about it. And so here I can say, oh, this is part of my paragraph tag. And so this paragraph tag has some text inside of it. But I also know that there's some inner tags that belong to the paragraph tag, and each one of these represent different links to more than likely a new web page on Wikipedia. And then some of these links might even have text themselves. And so the goal with web scraping is to basically get this information out of this web page, but by parsing the HTML code. And that's the beauty of BeautifulSoup, is because it does all of this for us behind the scene, or at least allows us to easily go through all this code and get the pieces of information that we want, and then provides a framework where it's easy to kind of jump around the different sections of your HTML code. So with that being said, now that we kind of understand how this web page is laid out, we understand that the HTML code is really just the containers, and the CSS is really the styles, and the JavaScript is really adding the interactivity to it. Let's see how we can go and get different pieces of information from this particular web page. And so once you're here, you can just open up a new Jupyter notebook. And then from here, we have to import some libraries. So the first thing that we're going to do is import our libraries. And there's going to be a couple that we have to. So the first one is going to be BS4. So we're going to say from BS4 import our BeautifulSoup object or module. And I always have to check this one because I don't know why, but I always, for some reason, like to misspell it. So there's that one. And then what the BeautifulSoup library is going to do is it's going to take all that HTML code and basically create an object where we can easily traverse all the code and then do kind of all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. But in order to basically get the code into the BeautifulSoup object, we actually have to go and request the web page. And so we need another library to go and request the web page and then get the information for us. And so we're going to say from URL lib dot request import, and then we'll say the request object and then the URL open method. And then from here, we have all the libraries that we need, so we can just import those. It doesn't look like we had any errors, so that's good. And then we'll insert a cell below. And then from here, we need to define the URL that we want to go and request. We'll pass that URL into our URL lib request.url open method. And then we'll pass that content into our BeautifulSoup object. And so the first thing we'll obviously do is define the URL we want to scrape. And so all you're literally going to do is you would just copy it. And then we put it right here. I'll give it some kind of name like wiki URL. And then I want it to be the raw formatted string. So I'm going to put it with a R in front. So this just means I don't have to put the whole little double slashes. Okay, and so now that we have the URL, what we're going to do is we're going to request this URL, and then something's going to be sent back to us. And basically what's being sent back to us is a response object. And so we want to store that response object in another variable, so that way we can take that response object and put it in the BeautifulSoup module. And so what we'll do is we'll say response object, and that will equal the URL lib dot request, yes, and then we'll call the URL open method. And then I'll simply pass through the wiki URL. And, just like that, we can always print it out if we're not sure. And I misspelled something, didn't I? Did I not import something? Oh, my bad. I think there we go. Sorry about that. Technically, you also need to import this one as well. And so we request our object, and then we have a response object that we can now play with. And so basically, we're just going to pass this response object into our BeautifulSoup. And then BeautifulSoup is going to also return something back to us. And we want to store that in another variable, so that way we can call it later down in the code. Now, by convention, we usually just call it soup. You can name it whatever you want, but if you go into other people's code, the convention is you kind of just name it soup. But you don't have to. And so what we do is we call our BeautifulSoup object. We pass through our response underscore object. And then we have to specify a parser, because not all web pages are made the same. Some have different versions of HTML, some have XML, and things along that nature. Now, in our particular case, we can clearly tell it's HTML. So what we'll do is we'll specify the HTML parser, just like that. And then so we'll say, here we're kind of creating the soup, if you want to think about it like that. And then what will happen is when we print this out, another error. Oh, sorry, not underscore, dot parser. Perfect. And so it does take a little bit sometimes, especially when it's printing it all out. But as you can tell, you get all this information back. It's a ton of code. It's very hard to kind of navigate it at first glance, because you're like, wait a minute, what am I looking at? And so now that we have all this kind of HTML code, it's in a format. And then something I kind of like to show people is, again, it is a beautiful soup object, and so this has its own methods and properties that belong to it. But now that we have that, we'll insert a cell below. And then from here, we'll talk about how do we find certain tags inside of our soup now. Well, the most basic type of search we can do is where we can search for basically the first tag that we're looking for. So there's two types of way to find. We can find either just one instance, or we can find all instances of a particular tag. What do I mean by a tag? Well, say for example, I wanted to find all the A tags because all of my A tags, they contain the links usually. So what I could do is I could say either A, just find the first A tag that you come across, or find all the A tags that exist in this particular HTML code. Well, let's start with the simpler example and just find the first instance. And so this is how it would look. So we'll find the first instance of an A tag. And so all we're going to do is we're going to call soup.find. We'll pass through the tag. And then we want to store this tag in a particular variable just so it's a little bit easier to kind of work with it. And so if I do this, we see that the first A tag that it encounters is this one. And if I go back here to my code, that seems to make sense because the first one I'm seeing is pretty much right there. I don't see anything in the head or anything along that nature. So that means there's nowhere in the head there's an A tag. This is simply the first one that we see in our web page. So that makes sense. Now, we can also do what I would call a more specific search. So we can say, hey, it needs to be an A tag, but it also needs to have a certain attribute. A common one is, well, I want it to have an href. So yes, it has to have an A tag, but I also want it to have an attribute of an href, because if it has an href, it means it has a link, basically. And so what we can do with this is we'll just take this one right here and we'll add a new basically argument. And so it's the name of the particular attribute that you're looking for. In this case, it's href. And then for this one, I just want to say it has to have an href. So I'm not looking for a particular href. I'm just saying that the href does have to exist in my particular A tag in order to be returned. And so when I do this one, now we notice that it goes to the next one. So it goes to the one that does have an href component to it. And so that looks correct when I'm looking at this. And so if I go up here, oh, lordy. I think it's this one. I'd have to double check. No, I think it's a protection policy or something like that. So it's probably somewhere in here, I would imagine, or maybe, oh yeah, I think, yeah, so here it is. So it looks like it's this one right here. So this is the first A tag that it encountered that had an href attribute associated with it. So that's the most simple type of find that we can do. So that's basically saying you're looking for one instance of that tag and only one instance. Now, when we do have an object that is sent back to us, we have to understand it is an object. It is an object that is sent back to us. And it's not just a particular, it's kind of deceiving. It looks like a string. It's not really a string. And so to kind of demonstrate that to you guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a cell below. And so from here, I'll say first, what is the type? Because I'm always big on that. I always want to know what kind of type I'm looking at. And so if I say display type link, we notice that it's actually not a string. It's not a string. It's a bs4.element.tag object. And so there's something special about these particular tag objects. They have certain attributes that we can access. So one of the most basic ones that we can ask for is, hey, just give me the name of this particular tag. What type of tag is it? And so we'll say define the name. And I'll say display tag dot name. So we'll just call the name attribute. Oh, sorry, not tag, link. So this particular tag object does have a name. It has an A tag name. So it's just telling us that it's an A tag. That's all. Now there's some other stuff that we can do. If we wanted to get all the attributes that belong to this particular tag object, so the one that we're looking up right here, we can do that as well. And what do I mean by attributes? So the href, the title, And I think that would be pretty much all of it, because if you can tell, that's pretty much all the stuff that belongs in this first one, at least if I remember correctly. I have to double check. So what we can do is we can get the dictionary of all the attributes, because that is what is returned to us. And so we can say, hey, display link, and then it's ATTRS. And then if you go below, we notice that we have a dictionary object returned to us, where the key is the attribute name, and then the value is simply the value that belongs to that particular attribute. Now, the neat thing is now that we know the particular attributes, an easy way to access those attributes is just simply pass through the link object and then the key value. And so we'll say get the attribute values. And so we'll say display link and then brackets. Let's just say I want the href first. And then if I want, I can also get the title attribute. And so here it returned the href, and then here it returned the title. So that's an easy way to access that particular attribute that belongs to that tag object. Now there's also another attribute called text. So if your particular tag object has text to it, all we would have to do is call the text attribute. So we'll say get the text. Now keep in mind, not every tag object has text. In fact, this one in particular, again, if I remember correctly, does not have text. So all it's telling me is that there's nowhere in here where there's text. There's attributes that have text, but there's no external text. It's not like a paragraph in a sense. So if you go to a paragraph, it's a little bit easier to kind of understand that. This paragraph tag does have text, and it doesn't belong to a particular attribute. So if I called the text attribute on this one, it would return text, because this particular text does not belong to the A tag or anything else. So that's just good to know for future reference when you're trying to get the text from a particular object. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to do our final example for this video. The idea behind the next example is we saw up here we can get one instance. What if I want all of the instances? So let's insert a cell below, and we'll say find all the A tags in the document. How would that look? Well, this is how simple it is. You can literally copy this. I would change your variable name if I was you, just so that way it's a little bit easier. It's all it is underscore all. And so we'll keep this for the next video, but let's just say we want all the A tags. So we'll call the links. Keep in mind, there's usually a lot of links, and we get this wonderful huge list back. And there's a lot to it. And so you can also slice it, and then it will give you each instance. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people think, oh, this must be a list, right? This is a list. It's a result set. It's not a list object. It's a result set object that belongs to BeautifulSoup. A lot of people think, oh, I'm slicing it. It must be a list, right? Nope. Unfortunately, no. And again, just to kind of demonstrate to you how many links were sent back to us, if you look at this, we had over 3,000 links. So on this page alone, there's over 3,000 links, which I think is just mind-boggling to think about, because obviously if you scroll down, you can clearly tell there's a bunch of links on here, but I never would have thought there was 3,000 links, but I guess it goes to show you the power of Wikipedia. So again, what we'll just say here is define the type. Again, this is just more for you guys, so that way you understand that, hey, this does have a particular type. It's not a list. And then we'll say the length of our result set object. And so we'll just do that. Perfect. Okay, so with that being said, I am going to stop the video. I think that's enough for today. So if you have any questions about kind of what we covered in today's video in regards to, just understanding what BeautifulSoup is, understanding how we're actually scraping it, how to use the find method, how to use the find all method, and then understanding the tag object. Please, as always, put them down in the comments below. Try to get back to you. And then also, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you're going to get regular updates, as we release more videos. I'm planning to upload all these videos at once, so you might want to make sure you put on the notification because they tend to get lost in the background, as I've noticed. But again, that's just for you guys. So thanks again for watching, guys. We will see you in the next video where we go over the find all method, but we're going to see how we can make it a more specific search. Thanks again.